The biggest reason small people struggle with money is not income. It's cash flow. And today I'm going to show you why even successful people lose control of their finances. See, every business leader, every head of household is under tremendous pressure managing cash flow. Yet, most of them don't have a system for managing it. So their finances become something dangerous, a gamble. That's why most of the debt people take on is not for strategic growth. It's simply to cover shortfalls. And once you start consistently borrowing to survive, you've already lost control of your cash flow. In this video, I want to help you take that control back because the goal of cash flow mastery is simple: never to commit to cash flow outflows when you don't have the inflows to support. For those new to the channel, my name is Bertrand Maimo. I help business leaders clarify complexity, master cash flow, and lead with confidence. If you run a household or help build a business, you are a leader. This channel exists to help leaders like yourself escape the noise and understand the foundational principles for business success. If you find value here, help us grow. Like the video, share it, subscribe, and hit that bell notification. Because even if you've already mastered these principles, someone in your network probably hasn't. All right, let's get back to the video. One of the key reasons cash flow mastery matters is that it helps you determine your run rate. What is your run rate? That's what it actually costs you to operate your business or household every month. And the reality is most people don't know what this number is. And for the few that think they have a number in mind, it's usually not accurate because their run rate is often overstated with unnecessary costs, subscriptions, apps, contracts, services that you barely use. And at the same time, it's understated sometimes because you're missing important costs, things like compounding interest expenses on debt, right? Critical professional services, the allocations needed for home repairs, allocation for savings, investment, accelerated debt reduction fund. Without understanding your run rate, you're navigating your finances blindfolded. But when you lock in your run rate, now you know your break-even point. And once you know your break-even point, you can begin planning for profit, for savings, for investments, and even for giving. With nearly 2 decades in finance, audit, entrepreneurship, I can confidently say this. The one struggle that is common to most households and businesses is cash flow management. And I've seen people who crack that code and others are still trying to figure it out. Difference between both categories is very subtle. The successful ones manage cash flows proactively. They use economic principles to guide their decision making. Meanwhile, those that struggle, they manage cash flows more reactively. There are no systems, no framework. They're just hoping things will magically work out. It reminds me of something, my son once said. We would clean out the garage and months later, it would be messy again. He looked at it and he said, "Dad, this mess, it keeps running back in." And I'll justify it by saying, "Oh, that's what happens when you have 3 kids in sports." But the real problem wasn't the kids in sports. It was the lack of a system. Once we created a system where the bikes would go, where the balls would go, where the gym equipment goes, the garage stayed clean. That's exactly how cash flow problems behave. You feel like you're about to get a break, and a few random unplanned financial decisions later, the problem runs right back in because there was no system in place to protect your discipline. And so today we'll focus on a few principles behind managing cash flow, mastering cash flow. Let's learn something from a macroeconomic example. The United States currently carries approximately $38 trillion in debt. Now, how does that happen? It happens when cash inflows are consistently lower than cash outflows. The government receives inflows from taxes, fines, tariffs, and other federal program revenues, but spending would include social security, healthcare program, defense, transportation, public safety, infrastructure. The list goes on. But when inflows cannot cover spending, the difference is funded either through borrowing or by increasing revenues, often through higher taxes. In a perfect world, if resources were used efficiently and waste were minimized, spending pressures could be reduced. With thoughtful reprioritization, even modest savings across large programs could cause meaningful impact. But the reality looks different. While the government seeks to increase tax revenues to support operations, legitimately, businesses and households are simultaneously focusing on strategies to reduce tax burden. Over time, this kind of tension, it causes a strange dynamic where groups that are depending on each other economically begin to feel like they are working against each other. The same principle shows up at the micro level. When a business or household operates in a cash flow deficit, pressure begins to build. Leaders push harder on employees, customers, and even family members who are attached to them. And if that pressure is not corrected with discipline and better systems, the entire structure can eventually implode. Now the question becomes, how do intelligent leaders, business owners, and heads of households end up in this situation in the first place? It's rarely because they lack enough income. It usually happens because we ignore economic principles that govern cash flow decisions. And once these principles are ignored, money starts moving in ways people no longer control. So let's walk through a few foundational economic principles that determine whether you master your cash flows or whether you are chasing their consequences, hoping for a better day. First principle, demand. You see, demand represents the purchasing power of a buyer. Purchasing power will either come from owned money or borrowed money. Remember that every dollar you spend becomes a sunk cost unless it effectively helps you generate future revenues. The one thing you must remember about demand: when you buy, do not buy based on your purchasing power. Buy based on an exact need. Supply, on the other hand, represents the availability of goods and services in the marketplace. Understanding the right sources of supply can save you a lot of money and heartache. Regulators are currently cracking down on the due diligence performed on contractors because many businesses and households are falling prey to scams. Why? Because they do not know how to identify and vet legitimate, quality, and cost-effective suppliers. So remember, do your due diligence on your suppliers. Do not be lazy. Now, after you have mastered the principles of demand and supply, master the principle of scarcity. You see, scarcity means resources are limited. You cannot fund everything you want. Sometimes there simply is not enough supply to meet your demand. And when scarcity hits, prices explode. Unless it's an emergency, avoid purchasing during scarcity because you would pay 2 to 3 times the normal price. And to avoid that trap, you must understand your options well in advance, which leads us to the next principle, choice. When resources are limited, you must choose. And every dollar you commit to option A removes your ability to pursue option B. Yet most people never even spend the time evaluating options B or C because of fatigue, laziness, right? You don't want to do the work. Here's the truth. When you enter into a negotiation, knowing your options, you receive far more favorable terms than someone who doesn't know his options. And sometimes because we have buying power, we take the lazy route to just buy all options. See, I once bought different kinds of weed killer for my yard because I was not sure which one would work. The weeds died, but I still didn't know which one actually worked. And because I was too lazy to commit to one for a season, I started just pulling them with my hands. Choose option that will teach you what you need to know. And remember, once you choose option A, you simultaneously give up option B. That brings us to the next concept, which is opportunity cost. Opportunity cost is the value of what you give up when you make a decision, when you make a choice. If you subscribe to Netflix, Hulu, Disney Plus, Prime, cable, which you barely have time to watch, the opportunity cost might be the garage gym that keeps you healthy, piano lessons for your daughter, maybe, that tutoring session that helps your son, healthier, more expensive groceries, investing savings, supporting your local church. Every financial decision you make quietly closes other doors. So make sure you are closing the right ones with your opportunity cost. Now, once you understand the principles of demand, supply, scarcity, choice, opportunity cost, you have to understand transactions and the marketplace. See, every cash flow exchange represents a transaction between a buyer and a seller. And if you run a business, you want to be spending on things that create value because that allows you to command better prices. But if, on the other hand, you're a buyer, you must understand the marketplace. If you only know one supplier, you're not in the market, you're in a monopoly. I once helped a client negotiate a software contract that was costing them $300K a year. Through these negotiations, we saved a small bit, but the reality was the vendor had no competition. They had built a product so unique. They were essentially the market, and so they controlled that negotiation. True markets create competition, options, and fair pricing. So before you buy, find the market, and you're going to find better pricing. Your goal is to achieve positive cash flows. That simply means your inflows should exceed your outflow. Managing for positive cash flows, it requires discipline. Watch my video on discipline. It also requires you to eliminate comfort spending. I have a video on that as well. You can watch that. And it forces you to build intentional streams of income that cover and or exceed your expenses. I've given you some practical economics behind excellence in cash flow management, but I want to crown it with the system that corrects it for you. There's a powerful lesson in the Gospel of Luke, Luke 14. Christ asks a simple question, and I'll paraphrase here. He says, suppose one of you wants to build a house. Won't you first sit down and estimate the cost to see if you have enough money to complete it? The principle here is simple. Before making a financial or any other decision, understand the full cost. And we often only look at the money, but we miss the currency of consequences: cost of time, cost of energy, cost of marriage, cost of family, friendships, relationships. I asked an audit partner once what it cost him to get to the top. He looked me in the eye and said it cost him his marriage. I've met others that admitted it cost them their health, and I know many who sold their faith to win the cash war, but then lost their peace. Diligent stewardship in mastering cash flows requires sacrifice, right? You stop thinking like a consumer and you focus on becoming a producer, one whose stewardship produces for others. It also requires you to think and work differently to overcome the temptation to satisfy unnecessary pleasures that in fact destroy your future in the long run. So the secret to better cash flow management has nothing to do with a fantastic system. I'm sorry to disappoint you. It has everything to do with your appetite. If you're willing to take inventory of what you're committing to, understand the currency of its consequences, and face the reality about what needs to change, truth will guide you into unmatched cash flow success. Because every decision carries opportunity cost. Make sure the benefit of what you choose far outweighs benefit of what you forfeited. Oh, so let me ask you a question before we close. What is the single cash flow decision in your life right now that needs to change? Is it A, an expense you need to eliminate? B, maybe a debt you need to attack? C, a stream of income you need to finish building? D, a habit you need to change? Or maybe E, all of the above? Type the letter in the comments, and don't worry, everybody gets an A in this exam. The goal is not perfection, it's just awareness and discipline. Awareness, change, discipline. But remember, cash flow mastery is not about having millions in the bank. It's about having discipline in your decision making, the ability to sustain your household or your business without compromising truth, values, or character. That's the kind of financial leadership our future desperately needs. Thank you for watching, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one. See you at the top.